welcome to the Cactus Clouds Art Studio. I'm going to take you through a full step-by-step of how I carved this little orb from K-pop Demon Hunters. I've been doing a series of teeny tiny prints with inspo from K-pop Demon Hunters using all of the tips and tricks from my new book, Pink Eraser Art. It is available for pre-order now, and it will be out on October 7th. The reason why I love Pink Eraser Art is because it makes the art of printmaking super accessible. You don't even have to have access to an art store to get linoleum blocks or anything like that. You can just use pink erasers from your school supplies, or you can even pick up pink erasers at the grocery store or the corner store. And the only other supplies that you need is a linoleum carver. I love the one from Speedball because it has tiny, tiny blades, and a pencil, an ink pad, and a paper to print on. So you can absolutely plan out your sketch on a paper before you plan it out on the eraser, but I kind of had in mind how I wanted to do this already, so I just started out sketching. You can see that I started with, figuring out where the main focal point was going to be, his little head. And so I drew a circle first and I built out the design from there. I decided to carve the bird first because I haven't carved pink erasers for a while. And he's black and white. And because he's black and white, I knew it would be really straightforward planning out the carving design. The thing about printmaking is that you only have two values you're working with, whatever you ink, and then whatever you carve away. It's just positive and negative space. And you can do yourself a favor by coloring in any of the areas that are going to be black, like I covered in the circle on his wing, because I knew that one would probably trip me up. And so I colored them in so I could keep track of what I was carving away. My first step that I always take is to carve this border before I begin anything else. And the reason that I like to do the border, there's actually a couple of reasons why I like putting a border on all my work. The first is that when I started carving these pink erasers in 2022, was that I wanted to do something that would make my art recognizable no matter what I made. Because I have ADHD, I flit between subject matters very quickly, and a lot of times people couldn't believe that that all of my art was made by me, because I dive really quickly between different mediums and subject matters and styles. And so I was thinking, what can I do to start this project from the very beginning and have something that everyone would recognize? And so I started doing the little borders, and which I love that now that the project has gone so viral, everybody does the little borders, because it's fun seeing my signature appreciated by the community so much. The other reason I carve the border is because it gives support for the print, so that I don't get a lot of ghosting and accidental marks when I print. It also makes the artwork have a finished look when it's printed, so it doesn't necessarily have to be framed to look amazing because it's already framed. And there is one other reason, is that it starts every single eraser carving process exactly the same, which really helps with, that moment of anxiety that you get when you're about to make your first mark. And so starting out with the border, it's like part of the routine now, and it just gets me diving into the eraser surface without overthinking. Okay, so after I carved the border, the first thing I did was carved out the eyes. I always make it my second step, to carve out anything that I know is going to be negative space. And so generally, like if there's any kind of face with an eye, I always carve out the eye first. Or if there's a sunshine or something with a highlight, I always start out creating the design by carving out whatever the lightest part of the artwork is going to be. And then I like to do an outline around the artwork, so I'm using with the speedball carver. This blade is the number 1, and all of the speedball carver blades have numbers and they're interchangeable on the handle, which I really love. But this one is one of the smallest blades that I have found on the market, and you can see how tiny it is. And so I use the size 1 blade, it's shaped like a V, to outline all of my design first. And from there, I start to remove the spaces that I want to be white when I print on the page. The benefit of outlining all of the artwork first is that you can have a lot of control with creating clean lines if you outline the artwork first. So if I just started carving out this space and then I was carving towards, the bird's neck or the beak, then I would end up with a jagged line. And this is one of the biggest questions that I get when I teach is, how do you make the lines so clean without having a bunch of jagged edges? And one of my top tips is to outline your artwork first before you do anything else. Now, as I was getting into actually carving out the details for the bird's wing and body, I really utilized the pointed tip of this blade. The thing about the blades that are shaped like a V is that you can get different widths of a line when you carve based on how hard you press into the eraser surface. So if I want to carve a really thin line, I don't press as hard, and then it creates a really thin line. If I need a thicker line, I press a little harder. Carving curves is one of my favorite things to do. You'll see that as I'm carving the curves of this detail on the wing, I'm actually turning the eraser. It makes so much more sense to me to turn the eraser into the blade than turning the blade around, because when I teach, I always have people trying to turn the blade and hold the eraser still, but our arms and our hands can only rotate so far. Like trying to turn your head around like an owl. I don't know if that makes sense. But by turning the eraser, you can create much more smooth curves. I turn my wrist just a little bit, but then I can rotate the eraser in a full 360, or however wibbly wobbly ways that I need to, depending on what I'm carving. And the erasers too are so soft that when you get into carving curves and you start practicing that motion of turning the eraser as you carve, it's kind of it's methodical and kind of meditative, and it feels really good. Like if you've ever carved linoleum, you know that it can be pretty rough, but the erasers are so soft that it's just really enjoyable to carve. Okay, and then at this moment I realized when I was drawing him, I almost forgot his little bird pants. Bird pants are very important, and it's easy to forget that they exist. I have a bird, and I regularly compliment her on her dapper pants. And so they have these little feathers that come down their legs, so there's these 2 little triangles. But I was laughing because I almost forgot them, and I was like, how could I do that? How could I forget the bird pants? We think they're funny. And another note is when I'm carving around lines like this, I like to make the lines fairly thick so that I have a really good guide, and I don't end up with any lines that are so delicate that they get destroyed as I carve. And so you want a little bit of thickness as you sketch out whatever it is that you're going to be carving. Now for this next little section that I'm carving out, it's actually a really good example of one of the concepts that I teach in the book. And you'll see that I'm carving out the wider space with the V-shaped blade, and it creates these ridges in the eraser surface. And if I carve out just like that and I leave those ridges, then they will print striped lines. Or if they're not perfectly striped and you carve, if you made, kind of jagged cut lines, then it will show up. And so I always go back over and cut down a second layer. So I'll go around and I'll carve out all of the negative space, and then I'll go back over and erase and carve out all of those ridges that I've created. If I have a really wide space, then I'll switch the blade out for like a U-shaped blade that scoops a bit more. Okay, so I'm actually going to speed this clip up because it's a very good example of if you try to remove a whole bunch of space with that teeny tiny size 1 blade, it's going to take forever and it's going to be a huge waste of your time. So this was like a really long clip of me carving away these little tiny pieces before I switched to, I think this is the size 3 blade that has a bit of a scoop to it. And so you can see it can be tricky because it's wider, and so I could mess up and cut away from my design on accident. But if you're really careful, you can just scoop out those wider spaces. And so the interchangeable nature of the speedball blade I really like. And here's what I was mentioning before, is you're moving those ridges and carving down a bit deeper so that you don't get any ghosting lines. You can get a really clean graphic print if you take a minute to clean up those carving lines. So now it's time to print, and I always use the Ranger's Archival black ink for all of my printing. I like it because I can refill the ink pad. I don't have to keep buying new ink pads. But this is the most fun part, because this is when you get the reveal of how your carving is, and if there's anything you need to clean up. The first print generally is like a priming print, so it doesn't always print perfectly. Sometimes you need to do a couple prints before you get a really clean one. But I'm using this little moleskin notebook. It's really tiny, and I can keep it in my little carving kit, which I really like. Okay, and then I was gonna clip this clip out or speed it up, but I realized I get this question a lot, is how do you print so clean? And it's because I obsessively press on every little square millimeter of the eraser that I can. Like, this is real time printing with these little stamps. I don't mess around. Like, I'm very thorough, and I usually get a pretty great print. So I was very proud and I thought I was done, but then I looked again and I realized that I didn't define his beak. I forgot to carve a line around that to outline it, which is kind of important. In my notebook, I have this messy page for cleaning the ink off. And then, so I just did very lightly, didn't press too hard, so I just got a real thin line to add definition. Defining lines is something that I talk about a lot in my lessons, is if you have anything overlaying on top of another thing, like the beak over the border, then you want to make a thin cut to define them from each other and make them pop out. So now you can see that his beak has definition. And now we're on to our second test print to see how it's going to come out now. And again, I'm pressing so thoroughly, but there it is. The teeny tiny definition that I put around his beak really makes him pop off the page. Okay, and we're done. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough, and I'm looking forward to carving another one soon.